Okay. So as we take a look at concept today, yesterday we just kind of got our feet under us with how do we read poetry? How do we look at it? How do we examine it for meaning? And we introduced this idea of kind of getting rid of this language of experience and how we want to look at it, or language of information, and instead viewing it as a language of experience. How do we convey that moment? And we sort of looked with a lot of things. And over the next couple of days, we're going to parse out some of the more important ways that you can really easily do that. We're going to start today by talking about diction. Is this a term we're familiar with? What's it mean? Close. Word choice. So when we think about that idea of a word choice, it's about controlling the idea as best as you can. We pick words to communicate the exact impressions that we have. And so consider with me, because this is an easy one to do. We have this nice bend in the hallway here, right? Where if somebody's coming from that side, but you're walking towards my room this way, you can't see what's coming around the hallway. So imagine that you're walking this way and around the corner there comes an unattractive person. How would you describe them? You can start with unattractive, absolutely. How else could you describe them?
Gruesome.
Gruesome. Which is the stronger word? Gruesome. It definitely gives a really clear idea of, what's a different word you could use? Hideous. Now, if we put those three in line, is hideous worse than gruesome? Sure sounds like it. And especially if you think gruesome can be a lot of different things, but hideous tends to go towards the way they look. Give me another word.
Unsightly.
Unsightly, huh?
Ogre-like.
Ogre-like. What about smelly?
You can smell them from there.
Could. But if we're talking about how somebody can be unattractive, what about stupid? Hopefully you find stupid people unattractive. I don't know. But if you look at it, right there, it's a totally different impression. Now, we're not pointing at anybody, so don't be like, ooh. We're not talking about anybody in particular. We're just looking at, there's a lot of different words, and depending on the word you choose, depends on the impression you give the person you're talking to. So when we look at diction choice, yeah, it's vocabulary to some degree, but it's really, how is that word most appropriate to convey what you need it to? We break diction into two different ideas. The first is denotation. When we talk about the denotation of a word, we're talking about the dictionary definition. I look this up. This is exactly what it says. Sometimes poets can play with that because we do know that words have multiple meanings. So, for example, think about the word spring. There are 4 definite meanings I know you can tell me. Tell me one. Spring. Definitions of the word spring.
Like the season?
Season of the year. There's one.
Metal thing that goes up.
A metal coil. 2.
Jumping?
Yeah. To leap forward or upward. Last one. A natural source of water. Now, your brain can disseminate based on context which of those definitions we're talking about in a sentence instantly, because we know. But poets can sometimes use that process of having to figure out which one to their advantage. Connotation is a little different. When we talk about the connotation, we talk about the associated meanings. We're going to play a little game to kind of talk about connotation here. If we want to describe someone as having the qualities associated with a child, we can go with 2 different forms of this word. We can describe someone as being childlike or childish. Both of them literally mean the same thing. If you look them up, their denotation literally says evoking the qualities of a child. But their connotations are very different. If you call somebody childish, what are you saying about them?
They act like a child.
Yeah,
Immature.
they act like a child in terms of being immature, petulant. But if we say that they're childlike,
They look like a child.
Tiny.
they may look like a child, they may be tiny. We tend to think of someone who is childlike as having a certain sense of innocence or a naive quality about them. They evoke the good parts of childhood, whereas childish seems to be associated with the negative parts. Literally, these two words mean the same thing, but when we talk about their connotation, very different. I want to try to illustrate these concepts visually with a couple of videos. It might take a little bit, and hey, if you're watching at home, sucks to be you. Come join us sometime. Bet your grade would improve. So I can't guarantee it. I am looking around the room now. So we're gonna visually do this. The first video is going to show you words in the bottom right corner, and then it's going to illustrate them in the larger frame. This computer sucks. And so it's going to be a good way to kind of see at work, how do we have words that have multiple meanings and multiple impressions? Come on. Maybe we won't do this. Maybe we'll just have to go to the work because these computers suck. Oh well. Maybe we'll just have to come back to this. Because yeah, now I've just locked the whole thing up. Piece of crap. Maybe we'll come back. Instead, let's put our attention to today's assignment. So if you have it pulled up, we're pretty much going to do it together. We're going to look at a poem from Emily Dickinson. Part of our focus here with poetry is that we're going to try to throw lots of different voices in front of you. Men and women, old and new. We want you to see the wide variety that poetry has to it. A lot of times, traditional studies of poetry don't always hit that really well. We focus on lots of dead white people, and that's about it. Here, we're going to talk about a dead white woman instead. So Emily Dickinson was a 19th century female American poet at a time that there was like no women writing poetry formally. Dickinson did not write for publication. She wrote these poems on scraps of paper and literally hid them under her bed. She lived kind of a very reclusive life. She was social, but an incredible introvert and full of anxiety. She never married, and as she got older, she eventually lived with her siblings and would have visitors, but would talk to them through a door so that she wouldn't have to be face to face with them. Yeah, she was a different cat. When she died, her siblings found all of these poems just scattered underneath her bed and chose to put them together and publish them because they recognized the voice that she had. She writes in a very different, non-formal way for the time period, especially. This poem that we're going to look at kind of deals with this idea of diction choices as we go through. Since we're talking about diction choices, as we start, I'm going to get out of your way for a second to read it silently. And my encouraging thing is for you to look up the words you don't know here. There are a number of words that she's going to use, we're going to talk about, that you might not know. An easy way to help you with this, too, if you're not familiar, don't just Google the word, but then hit the image button. Sometimes, especially if you look at the word frigate here in the first line, it's a type of boat. Okay. But if you hit the image button, you can see pictures of frigates. It may help you a lot more. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to preview the poem, to look for words you're not familiar with, and my suggestion is hit the image search button, see what it gives you. We'll come back together in a couple of minutes. Okay, now that we've got the video part working, before we go back to the poem, we'll take a look at the kind of visual representations here. So again, bottom right corner, the word will be in red. They're going to try to depict different meanings of the words. We won't watch the whole thing, but you'll get the idea. Right ball. Right. You break it up, man. I can't hear you.
We're gonna run away. I'm serious. We're gonna run away.
Get the idea here, especially visually. You get to see how we can show those multiple meanings, even at times, multiple meanings at the same time. Think about the guys in the booth split apart, having a banana split. We're kind of engaging that idea. Second way we can do it. Anybody familiar with the show Different Strokes? Nobody at all. What you talking about, Willis? The black kid? Nope, still not. Okay. So Different Strokes was a sitcom in the late 70s and the early 80s. It's perfect because it was in the time period that the theme song of the show told you everything you need to know about the show. And so as you watch, they're going to storytell visually, but also with the music.
Now the world don't move to the beat of just one drum. What might be right for you may not be right for some. A man is born, he's a man of peace. Then along come two. They got nothing but the genes, but they got different strokes.
Okay, so the show is real simple. Rich white guy has a black maid. She drops dead, and she has two black kids that now are orphans. And so he decides, hey, why don't I take you from your inner city home to my big uptown penthouse, and we'll all live together as a family. So you see it presented through the music, through the rest of it. Would I have to tell you that this is a comedy? Based on the music, based on the tone, based on their facial expressions, would I have to tell you that that was a comedy? If you saw it on TV? Or would you be able to guess? Let's say you'd probably be able to guess. You're an intelligent viewer.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
If we take a look at that concept of, hey, here's the definition of the word and here's how it's conveyed. I'm going to show you a second video that changes one thing. And we're going to talk about how that one change will alter the rest of it.
The background music.
Yes.
I was right for once.
Now does that seem like a comedy?
I'm laughing.
Well, because you have a dark sense of humor like I do. No, it doesn't seem like a comedy at all. So when we talk about connotation and denotation, consider the fact that all I did was change the music in the second video, but all of a sudden I changed the connotation of it. You perceive that video in a very different way. Even though the definition, the surface part, didn't change at all. So as we look here at Dickinson's poem, we're going to talk about how her diction choices help to influence the meaning. So if we go through and we read it together quickly. There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without oppressive toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. It's simple. It's bouncy. It rhymes. And you're going, this is what I expect from poetry. Yeah. So we said, frigate's a boat, right? How big of a boat are we talking about? A really big one. How does the choice of frigate help to emphasize line 2?
If it was just like a boat, it wouldn't really mean anything.
Yeah, if all it was a boat, you don't get the idea of how far you can go. What's the central idea here in the poem?
A boat can take you anywhere.
Because books can take you anywhere. Think about that poster you probably saw in the elementary school library that had that, there might be a cat on it and a rainbow, and it's like, books take you lands away. Yeah, same thing here. But choosing frigate helps to emphasize how far you can go. If Dickinson had written, there's no canoe like a book, they ain't going that far. You saw, hopefully, you looked up what a courser is. And so it helps to give that sense of prancing poetry, the bouncing nature of the rhythm in the line. Here we get to that idea of books are cheap and they're simple and they're available to most. This trip, may the poorest take without a press of toll. They don't have to worry about paying a hefty fine like you do when you have to travel. Now we get down here. She chooses a chariot. Now you notice all of her metaphors in this poem relate to means of travel. Frigate, courser, chariot. Tell me what comes to mind when you think of chariot. Huh? Kings and queens, Rome. What else? Battle.
Horses.
Yeah, horses. But does it seem like an expensive thing? The chariot itself? I mean, if you think about the simple chariot, like it's just wood, and two wheels. It's pretty simple. Like, if you've ever made a go-kart out of wood, it might not have seemed cheap, but it's something that you can put together. It's not as expensive as a car. I'm talking like a soapbox kind of car, if you ever did one of those. So when we look at this, she chooses chariot because she wants to emphasize the word frugal. Meaning, not just cheap, but simple. If she had said how frugal is the Lamborghini, first off, he would have been like, lady, what's a Lamborghini? It's, 1850. What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. But even there, that's an expensive car. We put it with luxury. It doesn't work for here. But we also want to look at how it functions with the last line of the poem. This simple means of conveyance, a chariot, is the thing that you're going to trust your soul to and put it in there. Books have a power. And when we look at how she wants to talk about it, she only hits the idea of a book and establishes it in the first line. But as you go through, she doesn't need to reestablish it. She can keep talking about the effects of it and bring us back to that basic experience. School has a really bad habit of driving a love of reading out of you as a student. Because all we do is hammer you with assignments and hammer you with things like that. And often we lose the fact that it's like, you can find a book that you really love and you lose yourself in it and you got it. And the poem wants to reassert that. Books have that ability. So if you take a look, today's questions, have we not answered any of them? I think we hit them all. Am I wrong?
Human error.
What's in front of you? Tell me if I'm wrong. Did we not cover any of them? Okay, so before you leave, today's assignment, we've pretty much done it. You just have to fill it out, turn it in. As we get into tomorrow, we're going to deal with another poem. We're going to change it up. We're going to talk about imagery and discuss one poem, and I'm going to throw in a second one just for the heck of it to kind of illustrate how we can use imagery to influence meaning. So before you leave, make sure that